Welcome to Trust Love.
Welcome to Trust Love Podcast.
Today we are discussing the mind, the tendencies, habits, and conditions of the mind, and the stories that go on in the mind that can cause us to create separation from our true self.
And basically, when you trace it all back, is that really the cause of like all of our suffering? Is the stories that the mind creates around what we are, around what creates desires. It creates all these fabricated scenarios that that kind of lure us into believing things that aren't necessary. I'm not going to say that aren't true, but aren't necessary for our well-being, for our health, for our happiness.
Yes, and these thought patterns of the mind oftentimes can identify with these stories and different, I guess, aspects of your life and who you think you are. That can be a result of identifying with these illusions. And it makes, I mean, we all go through this, you know, from the beginning of time. We're given like a name, we're given a gender, we're given all these things of which we think that we are, and we begin to identify with things that are not our true self. And so when we become aware of what we're identifying with, we then have the choice and the, I guess, the knowledge or wisdom to know that we are actually not that. We're not any of it. And so I think that's the essence of this talk today, is getting clear about what we are not, bringing awareness and light to the ways that the mind can immerse itself in illusion, and what ways in which we are identifying with that is causing us suffering, so that we can truly become free.
Yeah, and it's about learning to trust beyond the mind. I think that's where a big part of this gets sticky and gets tricky, is we don't feel like we can trust life without our mind being involved with life. I think that's something that's really a big part of this, is we feel like if we just kind of flow with life, then things won't get taken care of, we won't be taken care of, that we won't survive without mental activity. And the reason we feel like that is because, one, we don't feel like that. The mind feels like that because that's true for the mind. It's true for the mind. The mind is the part that won't survive without itself, without its own presence or being. It actually disappears. The mind actually disappears when we are in our true being. And that's what's scary. That's when the mind creates fear, and that's when the mind starts to create all kinds of stories. And I think that's probably one of the causes for these stories to manifest, is to maintain the power being fed to the mind field, so that it can continue its existence. And when we say things like surrender to God, what's actually happening is the mind is giving up its power to the self. So the mind, which is busy and active and creates all kinds of different dynamic expressions that our world is reflective actually of, that part of us, or that part that we witness or experience, surrenders its will to silence, basically, to emptiness, to openness, and which, when that happens, there's an immense feeling of peace.
Beautiful. And so something that I think is important, in which you just stated, is the tendency of the mind to become attached to itself in a way. And so that fear that comes up when you begin to remember who you truly are, and all these stories that come up can cause us like fear, and actually cause us to not fully remember in a way, because the mind is trying to kind of pull you back, trying to lure you back in.
Mm-hmm.
So being aware of that. So when you begin this journey of coming home to what you already are, there might be the tendency for the mind to now cause all these other thought patterns and stories to again create another gap. So when you're like getting close, and then all of a sudden whatever comes up, this is just something that you may that oftentimes happens.
Yeah.
And so bringing that into our awareness, that when the mind does come back up, not to allow yourself to go backwards or get stuck in that fear, but to know that's just the tendency of the mind, because it doesn't want to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so good, because that is almost, I'm only going to say almost, because I can almost guarantee that happens to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That happens to everybody on the path. At some point on the path of like awakening, there will be a pure, direct experience of truth, of self, of God, whatever you want to call it. And then the mind will create something that will pull you back into the mind field. It'll create some kind of a story to put you back into a delusion. And that could be something along the lines of like, it might manifest like you discover something through a specific practice. Let's say it's yoga. You discover something like that, and then you say yoga is the best. That instant where you've created a separation from everybody else who doesn't do yoga. And true being, true self-experience is one. And there won't be a view or perspective of other within that. So anything but a unified perception is mind. Anything but the experience, the like confirmed experience of unity, peacefulness, contentment, anything but that is mind. So this is like really helpful, actually, because if we're very, very clear on what we are not and what's not actually true, then it's easy to detect and just stay where we are. If we are what we are, then we don't have to do anything about that, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing that we need to do to like become ourselves. We are ourselves. It's actually kind of if you think about it, if you just break that down, like self-discovery even, or like even like if enlightenment is self-realization, it's like almost like a crazy concept to say like I am already this. Then if that's true, then why do I need to do anything? Mm-hmm. It's because I don't need to do anything.
Right. It's actually so simple to, there's nothing that you have to do. You already are that. And something that Muji just said in our satsang with him was it's not like a becoming, it's actually more of an unbecoming. Which I loved, because again, coming back to the mind and its conditionings, its habits, and its ways of thinking, and like diving into these stories, it's really just getting rid of all of that and coming and just being who we truly are, which is already us. There's nothing that we have to do.
Yeah.
All we have to do is be. And so it's actually so simple, but the mind loves to complicate it.
And that's where like those stories come in. The mind knows, because the mind has been with you your whole life. It knows through memory, I guess you could say, or just brain activity, what certain types of thoughts are going to pull you back into the mind. It knows everything that's going to work, and so when you start, for example, like if it knows that like when I was young, when this body was young, anger was something that like was really like indulged in. You know, like when anger would come up, it would totally consume me. And depression on the other end of that. Anger and depression were two things that when they would arise, they would totally consume my whole perception of reality. And so, because the mind doesn't care about well-being, it doesn't care about health, it just wants to exist. It just wants to be in power. So if it's destructive, it doesn't matter. The mind's not going to on its own be like, well, actually, we'll get to that in a second. It eventually does get tired of its own game, um, but it'll use what has worked throughout your existence to lure you into the mind space and to give energy and interest and awareness into the stories that the mind is creating, right? And as we work through those, let's say I get over anger and I get over depression, yay, victory, then that turns into I've accomplished something and I'm better than everybody else or something like that, potentially. Another story, you know? So it's what really, I guess, what the point of this talk is to really get clear on noticing the stories, noticing any and every story that's created. And it's not about like denying them and not like listening to them. You know, we can listen to them, and if there's messages within them as far as what to do in the world and that kind of a stuff, we can engage that way. But to absorb in the story and identify with them, where we start to have like feelings of separation and things like that, that's what we want to avoid. We want to stay in our true center, and then thoughts, feelings, all this kind of other stuff can arise, and then we just engage with the world lightly. But we should remain in a peaceful state, even if we're engaging in like intense activity or intense experience. Internally, our space is non-moving.
And another way that stories can come up, that the mind can kind of try to lure you, is through desire. And so noticing when you have the desire really for anything and seeing where that desire is coming from. Like, just to give an example, my desires in the past had to do with drinking and drugging and trying to escape my sober state for whatever reasons, many of them, you know, that the mind created a story around. And so trying to escape just what was. And then I let go of all those things and let go of those addictions. And, you know, of course the mind is like, oh, I'm so proud of myself, I let go of all these things, and then kind of can redirect my desires in a different way, whether that's like sex or just like kava and kratom, which are herbs, you know, but there's still like a bar setting. And so just noticing like, okay, I'm replacing one desire for the other. That's not really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to, as you said, to remain in that centered state and stop escaping from ourselves. And what's the purpose of that is just so that we can truly kind of just be in a peaceful state and stop running from ourselves, stop running from each other, and experience what is here as it is. You know, when we indulge in the stories of the mind and when we indulge in our desires, we are never satisfied. And there's this constant like yearning and looking for more, looking for something outside of ourself. And so I think the purpose of this is so that we can just be ourself fully. And we no longer are looking outside of ourselves to be internally satisfied, because the self is infinitely satisfied. It is content. It just is. And so this is pretty much how we can like end suffering for ourselves, and so that we can also stop causing others to suffer too. So it's not just like all about ourself. It's when we do this for ourselves, we are creating peace all around us, and it expands infinitely in all directions. When we are in that state of isness, then we truly are radiating that to all beings, and we are cleansing our ancestral line that has come before us and that is coming after us. And we are also, you know, just everyone that we come in contact with. We are purifying them just through our purifiedness, just through being. And so that's part of like the reason of like, why are we doing this work, you know?
Yeah.
Why, like, who cares? And yeah, it's
So
really
beautiful. So beautiful. That's something that's, I think, a common inquiry or a question with all of this. So all the innate qualities of like the Buddha exist within what we're talking about. Experience beyond the mind and living identified with the true self and beyond the stories of the mind. What's left when everything else is discarded is the qualities that the Buddha said were qualities that we should live by. So like you can kind of go about attaining this in a couple of different ways, because even within yoga there's kind of like moral conduct guidelines towards behavior. But what we're talking about is kind of doing that in the reverse. And we're kind of saying when you enter as your pure being, all that's left is kindness. All that's left is compassion. All that's left is pure divine love. And you just exist with life spontaneously. Every moment you're just there with every moment purely as your true self without any story. And the actions that just are performed are like, it's like just watching nature. There's no difference than with you watching some birds interact with trees than actually watching your own body interact with the world. There's actually no difference. You know, your body is a part of nature. The birds are a part of nature. You are the watcher of everything, including the actions, the speech that comes out of you. You are the watcher of all that, not even the doer of all of that. The actual doer in this world is beyond what we can even fathom. You know, there's some kind of divine play happening with all of this. And when we step into this position, we get closer to the source of that play, and we get closer to, and then every moment of life is revelation, is enlightening and blissful, no matter what's going on. So I love what you were saying about that, because you end up just naturally embodying everything you could ever want to even be, and you step into your life's purpose when you do this. You can say that all of our life's purpose is to enter into this space and exist as that, and it's going to look different for every being. There's the experience of individuality doesn't disappear when you enter into the universal being, the universal self. If everybody enters into the universal self, which is the same for everybody, it still is manifested through individual bodies, and it still is expressed through individual bodies. So we don't lose anything. We don't lose any aspect of being a part of life. We don't lose even desire. Even desire still shows up, and you may still even act on desire, you know, but the experience of it is different, as opposed to being absorbed into it and saying, I have to do this, or you know, it ends up being like you just like kind of following trails. You know, it's like God, you know, uses desire to kind of wave you in a direction. You follow that guidance. You go with that, let it kind of carry your being, and then experiences happen, and then you just continue. You just keep going. And you have this beautiful kind of like almost childlike curiosity and fulfillment with life every moment of your life. Every single moment of your life is fulfilling. Even the most mundane experiences, you find a cessation of restlessness. You find a cessation of frustration, even when with things that would normally frustrate you, like you lose your keys or something like that, and you can't find them, and you have to be somewhere, and you're going to be late. You know, all these things can happen, but all the feelings that would normally come along with them, because you're not absorbing into the mind and that story of that experience. I lost my keys and I'm going to be late to work. You know, when you remain here, there's a curiosity to it. And then you end up finding an old picture of your grandmother that you hadn't seen in a while, and it just brings you into this beautiful state, or whatever it is. But life unfolds with this when you trust the mystery of everything. That's in alignment with truth. That was a long string.
It was beautiful. I think the main things that were said in that string that like stuck out for me were, one, coming back to that story that the mind may like indulge itself into of, well, if I immerse myself in this silent space, how am I going to take action or do anything? And that was something that you really touched upon was well, we're actually not the doers. God is the doer of all things. And when we immerse ourselves in that space, it's not like we stop doing. It's not like we stop taking action. We're actually able to better do everything that we have to do, and we're able to do it in a peaceful, centered space. And yeah, everything is just more pure from that space. And so it's not like you stop doing. It's just the mind, you just releases its control over how to do things, and things get done more effortlessly because you're in that space. And then what else did you just end with, which was beautiful? Oh, trusting the mystery of life, which is like the same, you know, when you release control and when you surrender to that silent space that is within you, which is also like God's essence. When you surrender to God, then you can trust that mystery of life. When you lose your keys, it becomes something exciting. You know, you're like, ooh, what am I gonna find? Or I wonder where they are. You know, it's just like everything, like you're saying, becomes playful and beautiful, and you can truly appreciate life more fully from experiencing in this statelessness. So
yeah.
So maybe we can touch on a few other stories of the mind, just so I think it's good for us to be able to see different stories of the mind, almost, so that we can be like, oh, I do that. That's me. Oh, that is me. Oh, that is my mind.
Yes.
You know, so then we can start bringing awareness to the ways of our mind and the ways that we create stories. So so we can just begin to give some examples. And then the challenge is to put it into action and to cultivate awareness in your everyday life, in every moment, and see where the mind is taking you. So, do you have any that you'd like to share?
Or I'm sure there's some in there. Let's see. I mean, ultimately, we can say that any of the stories are to be no more than glanced at, if that, you know. But some common ones that can come through are like what we just talked about is a good example of one, of like that doubt. So like everything that we're saying here, something that often happens is like a doubt of doing that. A doubt of surrendering to God will come through for whatever reason, you know. A doubt of like the teaching, you know, will come through against it. You know, your feelings about God will arise and try and come up with something. Or like sometimes it's even like so random and silly little distractions of like, you know, what are they wearing? You know, or little things that will distract from the moment.
A lot of the time it can be doubts about ourselves as well. And that's like a big one that you can pick up in your own language. I find that's that we all, I feel like oftentimes we'll speak about ourselves and we'll have a limited mindset about what we can do, what we can achieve, what we can create, or what's possible. And we, without even being aware of it, put all these limitations and speak all these limitations out into the world, and remembering that our words are very powerful. And so whatever we believe, whatever we kind of are vibrating at, that's what we're going to attract into our life. And so it's important to not place those limitations on ourselves, and to, once we enter that space of limitlessness, then we're more able to attract limitlessness. We're able to attract abundance, you know. And so that's a big one, is that I find people are like, oh, I just don't have time to do that. Well, you're not going to have time if you don't think you have time. You know.
It's true.
Also, like, just like, well, that's great that you can do that, but like my mind just will never be able to do that.
Too
you
busy,
know.
yeah.
Well, again, If you don't believe that your mind can do it, it's not going to, of course, you know? So really be mindful about the way that you speak about yourself, and again, what beliefs are you feeding?
Yeah, that's so great. And that's another trick. It's the mind that says the mind is too busy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's that's another identity. There's an identification with my mind is too busy. What is all this about? All this about is beyond mind. If we are not the mind, then why does it matter if the mind is busy? Right? It doesn't matter at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story to keep you from really falling into this. If you believe that the mind is too busy to do this, or you don't have time to meditate, or don't have time for this kind of work, or again, or don't have the energy for it, or don't have the discernment for it, you know, these are all tricks of the mind. Any kind of, because everybody can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can do this. The only thing that keeps anybody from doing this is exactly what was just said, is the doubts that you can. Because all it takes is not believing in the mind's stories, not believing in them. Anything that is perceivable as yourself, anything that is experienced is not yourself, because something has to be there to witness that. So what comes through, like these moments or lures that the mind will come up with to keep you in this state of like, that's them, you know. And if what one human can do, another human can do, others can accomplish it. Everyone can accomplish this. This is our potential. You know, for some reason humans have evolved to a degree to be able to experience and unify, connect with spirit. Humans, that includes the mind. You know, the fact that the mind is even contemplating spirit is an incredible miracle. And then to exist as spirit, transcending of the mind. This is like human evolution.
Beyond the illusions of the mind and the impulses of the body is human evolution.
Yeah. And it can be said that all of the movements of the mind are to a degree illusion. That's something that the mind won't want to accept. You know, we're really like calling it out here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and again, it's like, okay, and we're not saying like it's evil or it's bad. It's beautiful. You know, I use the analogy all the time, like the mind is like an artist. You know, it's like a director of movies. It's beautiful. It's cool. Like, it's awesome. It's amazing. It's creative. You know, but when we believe it to be true, if we went to a movie, like a horror movie, and we believed it was real, we would have a panic attack in the theater, you know? And it's no different than when the mind creates these stories, and then when we believe in them. It's no different at all. It's like the mind lures us into being a character of its stories. It's not even true.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even real. We're just sitting there watching it. And then that goes along with emotions. You know, this is a good analogy, because if you've ever been in a movie theater, I actually am guilty of this myself in the past, of like being in the movie theater, like just really like being locked into the movie, and like something happens, you're like, wah, you know, freaking out in the movie theater, like when you're like absorbed into it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, but it's internal, you know. You like that? But it's just an internalized version of that, and it's like one layer removed. So like the physical world and reality is mind, right? That the mind perceives, interprets, and then creates another story of that, right? That there's another perceiver too, that witnesses that and makes intelligent discernment of that. And then there's another layer that witnesses that, right? So it's a matter of just coming back and back and back and back and back until there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Until there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Because perception, perceiving itself, is the end of who we are. So it's only when there's nothing left to perceive that we can find ourselves. If that makes sense.
It's only when there's nothing left to perceive that we can
Find ourselves.
So, do you mean like stop projecting outwardly and perceiving the world around us and just going within? What do you mean by that?
I mean, stop identifying with things that are witnessable.
Ah, okay.
Anything that is, it's to stop identifying with things that are perceivable. Because if anything that's perceivable, there has to be a perceiver to perceive it, right? Anything that is witnessable, there has to be a witness of that. And that's where it gets tricky, is because our self is the end and there's nothing left to perceive. Like, we can't look at ourselves. That's the whole thing of it, is we can't like perceive our perceiving, right? So that's why we can only feel what that's like. We can only experience what it's like to be that. We can't say, oh, there it is, I found it, because what's pointing the finger? There has to be another thing there, right? So we got to just keep going back and back and back and back until there's nothing left to perceive, and we're just experiencing presently.
Right. So like I'm seeing this.
Yes.
Right, but I know it's not me.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, am I perceiving it? Right now, I'm perceiving it because I'm seeing it.
Because you can describe it.
Right.
Right. You can, and it's in front of you, and it's obvious that.
Right. And so we were speaking before how like you can be in this state of selflessness or pure self, right? And still move about the world, which involves seeing and perceiving. So I'm wondering, I don't know if I'm understanding you fully, because now what I'm hearing you say is that once we stop perceiving is the only time we can find ourselves.
I see what you mean.
You see what I mean?
Yep. But it's not about like stop not perceiving anymore. It's not like the world disappears. It's identification.
Right. So that's just the key point that I really wanted to be clear about.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not identifying with anything that's around me, but I can still see it. I'm still a part of the world, but it's not me who's even like a part of the world in a way. You know what I mean? I understand that that there is this body that the self is in, but I am not this body. However, I am experiencing this water, and I can drink it and feel it like move through me.
You witness that too, though. You witness the water going through the body.
Exactly.
That's
so
watched.
I'm witnessing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So just being clear about that, because that confused me a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah. So it's about being the watcher and not identifying with
anything that's watched. Because that's what happens is a feeling comes up when we say, I am that. We say, I am that feeling. Or we say, I am drinking water. You know, we're watching something happen and we're saying that we are that. And I'm witnessing the body drink and then feeling what it feels like to have the water go through the body. That's all perceived.
Right.
Right. So what is there that experiences all of that and that moves through that, or that is all of that?
Who is the watcher? Right.
So that's
good. Is there something beyond the watcher?
Is there something beyond pure perception?
Is there something beyond the witness?
Could there be?
Something's witnessing the witness, right? Or no?
Then that would be witnessable. Then the witness would be perceived. Then what would be that?
Something's aware. There's an awareness of something witnessing the perceiver.
Is awareness different than perception?
No. So it's happening at the same time.
So like pure awareness is just existence or just consciousness without anything labeled onto it or put onto it. Things can happen like within it, but it remains as it is, unaffected.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, I think the big parts of this like whole story thing is that like, so like our eyes, you know, perceive and see the world, and our vision for humans is one of like our most dominant senses.
Mm-hmm.
Vision. So that's something that makes it for us, because that's such a powerful force within us, that it makes it seem like what we see, we're like, it makes it like we identify with our seeing, right? We think that that's as far back as it goes, is that whatever is behind the eyes is who the self is, and what seems to be behind the eyes is the interpreter of the senses, which is an aspect of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever interprets all the sense information we get from the material world, that's probably most commonly what is falsely identified with, which is the mind, you know. But that's the reason that it seems that way, is because there's information coming in, and then that information is received in like the brain or the mind or whatever, and then that starts to be interpreted, and that's when the stories start to be created, is through that kind of whole processing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from like the beginning of time too, you know, when we're a baby, we're like, I need, you know, we're young and we need things.
Yeah.
And we also identify with that need, that desire. And that's part of like the body, the impulses of the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the body does need certain things to survive, but that is not the truth of who we are.
Right.
And so that's another big one, is like the impulses of the body. We were speaking about this the other day with sex.
Mm-hmm.
And the impulse is to, let's say, have sex with like a bunch of different women for men, because that's part of their instincts, is to pretty much like impregnate as many women as possible. Mm-hmm. That's like their instinctual nature of their body. But once you become awakened and become awakening, you begin to be more conscious, and you're not kind of run by those impulses of the body. Mm-hmm. And so same with the illusions of the mind, or the impulses of the mind. You're not being run by your mind or body anymore, and you are at one with spirit. And so you're not like acting on every impulse. You know, imagine if you acted on every impulse.
Oh my God. Please no. Please no.
And so that's another big one to be aware of, is what are impulses of the body, what are illusions of the mind, and what is the truth. And yeah.
Beautiful. And something I'd like to add to that is then with that awareness, let's just keep going, because with that awareness, there's something we experienced today, is then there becomes like, you awaken to this spirit, and it's beautiful, and you have an experience of actually what it's like to be your true self. And then there still continues to be floods of desires and aggression and judgment, and all the mind stuff is still there. And then there's this, like, the mind actually creates a new identity of the spiritual seeker being person that's trying to get rid of all the mind stuff. The mind creates that person. The mind creates the spiritual seeker that needs to get rid of the mind. So this is like a really tricky thing. It's like Muji says this a lot, actually. He tells a story of, it's like the criminal realizes he's being chased by the police, so he puts on a police uniform and then runs along with the police. Right? But it's all the mind. It's the perfect scenario. You know, if
Right,
you think about it as a criminal, it's the perfect scenario for him to chase himself. It'll never happen. It'll never be found.
right.
Really important to realize that.
Right. So the mind or the ego puts on like some spiritual outfit and like,
Speaks
you
the
know,
lingo.
yeah, has the lingo going on. So this is a really good thing to be aware of as well.
This is a big one.
Yeah, it can put on a mask and put on a costume and act a certain type of way, but to be aware of the ego and what different costumes it comes in. And this requires being humble and having humility toward really being honest with yourself and looking at yourself clearly. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have humility, you'll never be able to kind of accept that, oh wow, I am living in my ego right now. I'm actually not a spiritual being, or whatever it might be, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's all an act.
Yeah. Yep.
And so yeah, that's a really, really good point.
Yeah. Yeah, now we're getting to the place of like where this type of stuff is what really starts to determine why, you know, there's spiritual beings and spiritual people, and then there's like Buddhas, you know. There's like a difference. And why is there a difference? Is because of these subtleties. It's because in the Buddha there's nothing left. There's no identity left that's being held on to. You know, and it gets the mind can get very, very subtle, but it'll never get as subtle as yourself. Right? Because nothing can be more subtle than what witnesses everything. Nothing can be more subtle than what you are. Right? Going beyond and as deep and back as far into perceiving as you can go is really, like, if there is to be said, a practice. That's what, and again, it's not a doing, but it's like you were saying before, it's stop doing. Stop doing. Stop it. You know? You know, and this doesn't rely on anything at all. That's what's so beautiful about this kind of like line of work. I don't know what to call it, but
We call it self-inquiry.
yeah.
I would say that's pretty much what this all is.
Yeah. Yeah. So within this, doesn't require, you know, anything at all to attain. It's just simply there, and it's just simply stop believing in what the mind is saying in any moment. And again, you'll always have the opportunity to go back into the world and in the field, but I would say, if there is something to be said as a practice, spend time where you disregard everything that the mind says, no matter what. Just to practice that and to start to pull the power away from the mind. And you can go back into it anytime you want. Absolutely anytime. You can pick right back up wherever the mind wants you to go. You can go right back into illusion. And you're never going to like lose anything at all. If you just spend some time, if you meditate and you have time to meditate, this is a good time to do this. But at any point in your day, when you're doing anything, you're driving in your car, you're working some task, you're picking some flowers, you're tying your shoes, you're taking a shit, like whatever, any time you're having a conversation with someone, no matter what it is, totally cut off all belief in anything that the mind is saying or doing, anything that's being witnessed. Cut off all belief in its like validity or reality, anything. Just try it. And again, you can always go back, but try.
Can you let go of your identification with your mind? Can you let go of your identification with your body? Can you let go of your identification with Davy Joe? Can you let go of even this idea of letting the mind go?
Awesome. Yeah. Keep going.
Can you let go of like the outfits that you wear, the style that you have, the job that you have? Can you let it all go? And practice this in your meditation. Practice letting every aspect, every condition, every belief system, letting all of that go so that you can just be. And this is the state in which we are experiencing truth, really.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the practice. Once you kind of let all of that go, you can see for yourself the true peace that comes from within. That is always there. It's never left you. It's always been there. It's there right now. And we just have these kind of conditions of the mind almost covering it like a dirty surface, that we just need to like wash clean. Yeah. It's like the clear glass was always there. It never left. It even needed to be there so that the dirt could be there too, But then we wash the dirt, we get rid of it, and then we come back to that clean surface that was always there.
And it's something that you can like really prove also, like stay within that, as long as is possible. If something does grab you and you do get pulled back into the mind, like just okay, but just keep coming back, keep coming back. And then as that time, I'm just going to use this wording for now, but because there is no time for the self, but until the habit to absorb in the mind fully like really starts to dissolve, you'll notice like this feeling of like I was experiencing the self for a time and then got pulled back in, and there'll be this kind of like in and out kind of feel that you'll experience. And then the next thing that will arise is like, well, how do I stop that, and how do I make this permanent? Don't even worry about that. Just, all that's necessary to do is to keep returning, just to keep returning to that unabsorbed state, that clear, pure perception state. That's all there is to do. Don't worry about don't worry if any frustration comes up of like, oh, I had it yesterday but I don't have it today. That's mind creating limitations. Just keep coming back to self, keep coming back over and over and over and over and over again for the rest of your existence. And then maybe in this life, keep going, and that sustains for longer and longer. The more you do it, that sustains, that pull loses more and more of its power, gets weaker and weaker. And then when there's the ability to stay there and like really be able to experience it for a duration, then see what happens when you engage with life. When you're there and you're empty and you're not figuring out life, when you're not planning life, when the mind isn't involved with life, still engage with life and see what that's like. Experience what that's like to be a part of life without involving the mind. To be present with everything, to be fully confirmed in your identity as pure, infinite, eternal self, and still a part of this material reality. You can confirm that, and you can notice that even when if you're in meditation, and the mind, and you're really present with who you truly are. There's still the world that's there, that's experienced even during that time, and just be with that presence and confirm that you don't lose anything by dropping everything. And in fact, you gain the whole world.
I think that's good.
I think it's good too.
If you have any questions at all, just know that we're here.
Yes.
We could even do a whole podcast on just questions that we receive. So that would be beautiful. We would love to hear your questions or any comments that you may have, any input or any experience if you tried this out and had something to share, please let us know
Yeah.
what your experience is like.
Yeah, would love to hear how this works out, you know, and I would love to experience, you know, because it works, you know, I know it works because I'm there, you know, but I would love to see what comes up as people try this, especially if this is new to you. If this is something you like never heard of or like is relatively new or anything, then I would love to hear feedback on what this is like, you know, all the way down the chain. So
Yeah.
please reach out.
And a lot of this was inspired by Muji, his
Yeah.
teachings. And so if you want to go deeper into these teachings, I mean, a lot of our talks are focused on this type of teaching,
Yeah.
non-duality
Yeah.
and impersonalism. But yeah, Muji is a wonderful source to go to for more as well. So you can go check him out on YouTube, and he has many books as well, which are beautiful.
Yeah, truly a master on all of this. So
Mooji.
Yeah. Jai Muji Bhadva.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
So many blessings to you all.
Blessings. Enjoy every moment. Namaste.
Namaste.